Grandma left me her house, but another family already lived there. Something was wrong from the very beginning. GPS led me to a Victorian mansion in Salem, and the first thing that caught my eye was that the house looked too well maintained. Freshly painted blue shutters, a neatly trimmed lawn, bright flowers in terracotta pots on the porch. The white porch railings gleamed in the sun as if they'd been painted recently. But this was impossible. Grandma Eleanor always said she had a house in Oregon, but she hadn't been there for over 30 years. Too big for an elderly woman living alone, too expensive to maintain on a modest nurse's pension. After the war, when she inherited it, there was no money for serious repairs at all. She used to tell me the house needed major restoration back then. A leaking roof, old wiring, heating problems. In the driveway sat a silver minivan with children's stickers on the rear window. On the back seat were a sports bag and a soccer ball. Warm yellow light glowed in the house windows, and smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was using the fireplace. 2 months ago, Eleanor died of lung cancer in a Chicago hospital. After a long battle, I spent the final weeks beside her, sleeping on a cot in her room, holding her hand during chemotherapy. On her last day, she turned her head toward me with difficulty and whispered, "Sarah, the house remembers the truth. Go there. Maybe she's still alive." Who was she? Sometimes, in recent months, Grandma would mumble about a girl she played with in early childhood. She'd tell fragmentary stories about a big house where they swung together on swings in the yard, hid in the attic, played with dolls in a high-ceilinged nursery. When I asked for details, she'd frown and say she couldn't remember. The psychiatrist at the hospital explained that children who experienced early separation trauma often develop compensatory fantasies. The brain creates imaginary friends to fill painful gaps in memory. Eleanor was adopted by the Mitchell family at age 3. Before that moment, her biography was a blank slate. Her adoptive parents only said they took her from a private children's home. All the archives were lost in a fire in the 1960s. Now I stood before this beautiful house with heavy brass keys in my hand and notarized inheritance documents. But there was a stranger's car in the yard, lights on in the windows, and I could hear children's laughter coming from deep inside the house. I'm 52 years old, and the last 2 years have been the hardest of my life. The divorce from Michael took not only half my savings, but most of my strength. 25 years of marriage collapsed when it turned out he had another family in a neighboring state. My children, David and Kate, are grown, living in different corners of the country. After Grandma's death, I was completely alone in Chicago. The house in Oregon seemed like a gift from fate, a chance to start a new life far from the place where every corner reminded me of the past. I took a month's vacation to come and assess the condition of my inheritance. My heart pounded as I climbed the porch steps. The boards under my feet were solid and freshly painted. The flower pots had been watered recently. The soil was still damp. I pulled out the key, heavy, antique, with an ornate head. It clearly fit the lock. I turned it slowly. The key went in easily, as if the lock had been oiled recently. Then the door suddenly swung open from inside. Before me stood a woman about my age, with short chestnut hair and a determined face. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a cardigan, warm slippers. Behind her was a cozy hallway with family photos on the walls and a child's jacket hanging on a hook. The woman looked at me with amazement and growing irritation. Her gaze stopped on my suitcase, then on the keys in my hand. Her face hardened. She demanded an explanation. What was I doing at their house? From inside came the sounds of dinner, clinking dishes, muffled voices, music. It smelled like fried chicken and fresh-baked bread. I explained that this was my house, showing inheritance documents from Grandma Eleanor Mitchell. The woman took the papers and quickly scanned them. Her face paled. She turned and shouted into the house. A man about 50 appeared, with graying temples and glasses. Behind him were two teenagers, a tall boy and a girl, obviously twins. The man introduced himself as James Carter. He explained that the house belonged to their family, his wife Linda, children Michael and Emma. They'd lived here with Grandma Rose for 18 years, ever since they got married. Rose had suggested they move in with her because the house was too big for one elderly woman. After her death 2 years ago, the house remained theirs by will. The world turned upside down. James disappeared into the house and returned with a folder of documents. He pulled out a property deed, tax documents, insurance policies, the same exact address, 1247 Maple Street, Salem, Oregon. The same county registrar's seals, the same legal force. 2 sets of documents for one house, 2 wills from 2 different women. James spoke in a softer tone, seeing my shock. He suggested I might have confused the address or there was another house with a similar address. I shook my head, pointing to the key in my hand. The key fit their lock. The address was correct. Linda nervously bit her lip. She suggested her husband show photos of Grandma Rose. Maybe that would help sort things out. James nodded and led everyone into the living room. A large family portrait hung on the wall, an elderly woman surrounded by family. Several more photos sat on the mantelpiece and dresser. I looked at the portraits and felt my stomach clench into a knot. This was my Grandma Eleanor's face. Not similar, almost identical. The same eye shape, the same lip line, the same facial oval, the same characteristic eyebrow arch, even the same smile, slightly sad, with downturned corners. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, found a photo of Eleanor taken last year on her 75th birthday. I showed the screen to the family. James, Linda, and the children froze, comparing the portrait on the wall with the photo on my phone. 2 elderly women, strikingly similar to each other. Different hairstyles, different clothes, but facial features so alike they could have been twins. Linda whispered that they looked like 2 peas in a pod. Michael leaned closer to the phone screen. He said he remembered. Grandma Rose always mentioned some sister. James frowned. Yes, she sometimes talked about a girl from childhood. They thought these were senile memories or fantasies. Emma added that Grandma had dreams about a girl who looked exactly like her. She said they played together in some big house. My breath caught. Eleanor told me exactly the same stories. Dreams about a girlfriend, a big house, playing together. James suggested we not stand on the porch, but come into the house and sort this out calmly. I hesitated. On one hand, a family lived here. On the other, I had documents proving my inheritance rights. Linda insisted. She said we needed to understand what was happening. These photos were too strange to ignore. The living room looked like a home for a large, close family. Comfortable sofas with throws, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, family photos on every surface. Textbooks were scattered on the coffee table. The kids had been doing homework. A piano with sheet music stood in the corner, potted plants on the windowsill. We sat facing each other. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile. Everyone was trying to understand an impossible situation. James asked me to tell them about my grandmother. I told Eleanor's story. Adoption at 3 by the Mitchell family in Chicago, a blank in her biography before that moment. Work as a nurse, marriage to Grandpa Frank, 2 children, the house in Oregon that she inherited but never moved to. Linda told a similar story about Rose. She was also adopted in early childhood by the Johnson family in Portland. She also remembered nothing about her biological parents. She married, had children. She inherited this house from a distant relative, a man named William Davis. She moved here in the 1950s. My heart stopped. Eleanor also received her house from William Davis. She said he was a friend of her father. We looked at each other in complete silence. Puzzle pieces began forming a picture no one expected to see. James said we needed lawyers' help. This was too complex for independent sorting out. But first, Linda suggested looking for more documents about Rose. Maybe we'd find something to help understand the connection between our grandmothers. We spent the next 2 hours studying the Carter's family archives. In boxes in the attic, we found Rose's old documents: adoption certificate, school transcripts, marriage certificate. And we found William Davis's will, dated 1945. In it, he left the house to my ward Rose Carter as a sign of love and care for her future. Carter. Rose's maiden name was Carter. I pulled Eleanor's documents from my bag. Her original birth certificate, found in her belongings after death. Eleanor Carter, born March 15, 1925. The same surname, the same birth date. Emma whispered that our great-grandmothers were sisters. Michael added, or twins. We sat in the living room of the house that once belonged to both our grandmothers, trying to comprehend the scale of the discovery. Eleanor and Rose, twins, born in 1925, separated in early childhood, adopted by different families in different cities, raised not knowing of each other's existence. And both inherited the same house from the same person, William Davis. But how was this possible? How could one person will one house to 2 different people? And how did both wills have legal force? We realized we couldn't sort this out without professional help. James gave me his lawyer's number. I provided contacts for the Chicago lawyer. We agreed to meet tomorrow morning for a joint legal consultation. That evening, I sat in my room at the Maplewood Inn Motel, 10 minutes from the house, trying to process what had happened. I called my children to tell them about the incredible discovery. David, my son, works as an engineer in Denver. He's a pragmatic person, accustomed to exact sciences and logical solutions. The story of the twin grandmothers seemed too fantastic to him. He asked if I was sure these people weren't scammers. Maybe they learned about my inheritance and decided to steal the house by forging documents. I explained that the documents looked genuine, and the resemblance between the grandmother's photos was striking. Plus these strange coincidences, identical dreams, identical surnames, the same William Davis. Kate, my daughter, lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. She works in IT and is usually more open to unusual situations. But she was also skeptical. She suggested I return home. This whole story looked very complicated. Why get involved in legal battles. But I couldn't just leave. Too many strange coincidences, too many unanswered questions, and most importantly, Grandma's last words. Maybe she's still alive. Who did she mean? Rose? Her twin sister, whom she dimly remembered from childhood dreams? The next morning, I met with the Carter family at lawyer Marcus Green's office on Main Street. Marcus was a man about 60 with a gray beard and penetrating blue eyes. He'd practiced in Salem for over 30 years and specialized in property disputes. We spread all the documents on his desk: wills, property certificates, adoption papers, photos of the grandmothers. Marcus carefully studied each paper, occasionally writing something in his notebook. His face became increasingly puzzled. Finally, he said that in 30 years of practice, he'd seen many strange cases, but hadn't encountered anything like this. Both wills looked genuine. Both inheritance lines were properly documented, and there really were grounds to believe our grandmothers were blood sisters. But how could one person will one house to two different people? Marcus explained this was the key question. We needed to conduct a thorough investigation of the house's history and William Davis's identity. He suggested ordering a comprehensive expert analysis from real estate and genealogy specialists. The cost would be several $1,000s. Time, at least 2 months. During the expert analysis, the status quo would be maintained. The Carter family would continue living in the house. I could stay in town or return to Chicago. I decided to stay in Salem during the investigation. I could extend my vacation for several more weeks. Nursing work was needed everywhere. I quickly got temporary work at the local Salem General Hospital. The first weeks in town were strange. On one hand, I felt like an outsider. Everyone knew each other. Everyone had their established lives. On the other hand, the Carter family was surprisingly friendly toward me. We met every few days to discuss the investigation's progress and share new findings. Michael and Emma, both 17, turned out to be very curious teenagers. They enthusiastically joined the search for information about our families. Michael was passionate about history and good at working with archives. He found old records about the Carter family from the 1920s in the city library. Robert Carter really did live in Salem, working as an engineer at the local sawmill. His wife Mary taught at elementary school. Emma was more creative but had excellent internet skills. She created a detailed genealogical tree, connecting all the found information into a unified picture. 3 weeks later, the first expert analysis results arrived. They turned out to be even more shocking than we expected. The house really did belong to both families on legal grounds. The reason was massive administrative confusion that arose in Salem in the late 1940s. After World War II, the city experienced a period of rapid development. New neighborhoods were built, roads laid, old quarters replanned. During these changes, many streets were renamed and houses got new numbers. The house stood on the corner of 2 streets, Maple Street and Oak Avenue. During urban planning reorganization, it could be assigned to either street. As a result of bureaucratic error, the house was registered twice, as 1247 Maple Street and as 324 Oak Avenue. These records went into different land books and existed in parallel for 70 years, never intersecting in official documents. When William Davis was drafting wills for the twins, he used both addresses. Eleanor received rights to the house at 1247 Maple Street. and Rose got the house at 324 Oak Avenue. Each was sure she was inheriting separate property. But this was only the first part of the story. The second part was even more tragic. Expert analysis of archival documents showed that William Davis really was the guardian of twins Eleanor and Rose Carter. Their father, Robert, was his close friend from college days. When Robert's wife died in childbirth in 1925, he was left alone with 2 newborn daughters. Robert was broken by grief and couldn't cope with caring for infants. He asked his friend William to help with the children temporarily while he recovered from his wife's loss. William was a bachelor, a lawyer with no family. He agreed to take the twins under guardianship for a few months. But Robert never recovered from his wife's death. In 1927, he contracted tuberculosis and died in a sanatorium, never managing to reclaim his daughters. William was left with 2 3-year-old orphans. He had no experience raising children and worked long hours at a law firm. Eleanor was a healthy, calm child. Rose was often sick and required constant attention and medical care. On the advice of doctors and social workers, William made a difficult decision: to place the girls with different adoptive families. It was believed this would be better for them. Each would receive maximum attention in families specializing in child rearing. Eleanor was taken by the Mitchell family from Chicago in 1928. Rose remained with William for 2 more years due to health problems. Only in 1930 was she taken by the Johnson family from Portland. The separation didn't happen simultaneously. The 2 sisters lived apart for 2 years, gradually forgetting each other. By the time Rose also found a family, Eleanor had already adapted in Chicago and considered the Mitchells her only parents. In the archives, we found heart-wrenching letters from William to the adoptive parents. He agonized over his decision his whole life. He constantly inquired about the girls' fate, followed their studies, health, achievements, before his death in 1945. William drafted wills for both girls, who were then 20 years old. He willed them the house, the only thing he had, hoping to somehow atone for his guilt in separating the sisters. In a letter to the notary, William wrote, "Let this house become a bridge that returns the girls to each other. If fate wills it, they will meet here and understand they were always family. But due to the address confusion, the meeting never happened. Each received documents thinking she was the only heir." Eleanor really did come to see her inheritance in 1947. The house stood half ruined after several years of neglect. The roof leaked, windows were broken, the garden was overgrown with weeds. The young nurse didn't have money for major repairs. She returned to Chicago, intending to come back someday when she had the means. 3 years later, in 1950, Rose came to the house with her builder husband. They repaired the building and settled there. Rose thought the house went only to her and didn't suspect the existence of a sister. So the 2 twins lived their whole lives in neighboring states, not knowing they had a blood sister. The most tragic part of the story emerged when we compared both women's medical records. Both Eleanor and Rose died from the same rare hereditary disease, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. This is a genetic disease that almost always affects twins simultaneously. Doctors explained that such a disease is extremely rare, 1 case in 10,000 people. The probability that two unrelated people would die from it in the same period is virtually zero. Eleanor and Rose died a year and a half apart, not knowing about each other's illness. Their bodies remembered the genetic connection that people had severed 80 years ago. In Eleanor's hospital records, I found a strange detail. In recent months, she constantly told nurses about a sister in Oregon who was calling her home. Staff considered this the ravings of a dying person. Linda told me that Rose also raved about a sister in a big city before death. She said she saw in dreams a girl who cried and looked for the way home. The family thought these were hallucinations from medication. Both women felt each other's approaching death across 1,000 miles. When Judge Harrison read the expert analysis results in the courtroom, dead silence fell. Now it became clear this wasn't a property dispute between strangers. This was a family reunion, torn apart by tragic circumstances almost a century ago. The court recognized equal rights for both sides, 50% of the house to each family. After the decision was announced, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed dramatically. James approached me for the first time in months of proceedings. He said he was sorry. He thought I was a scammer trying to steal their house. Linda apologized. The children looked with curiosity. So I was their distant relative? We met at a cafe near the courthouse to decide what to do next. Formally, the house now belonged to us equally, but practically, a family with children who had grown up within those walls lived there. James suggested buying out my share. Not immediately. They didn't have that kind of money, but in installments over several years. The alternative was to sell the house and split the proceeds in half, but that meant the family would lose their home. I realized I couldn't destroy these people's lives. They weren't to blame for the administrative confusion of the 1940s. The children, Michael and Emma, had grown up in this house. These were their roots, their memories. I agreed to the installment plan. They would pay me half the assessed value of the house, partly immediately, partly over 5 years at a symbolic interest rate. But while the documents were being prepared, I stayed in Salem for another month. And during this period, events occurred that completely changed our relationship with each other. Michael, passionate about family history, found even more documents in the city archive. It turned out Robert Carter, the twins' father, had left diaries. They were kept in the archive of the law firm where William Davis worked. In entries from 1925 to 1927, Robert described in detail his torment after his wife's death, how he tried to cope with 2 infants alone, how he asked his friend William to help for a few months while he recovered. I read an entry from March 15th, 1926, the twins' first birthday. Ellie and Rosie turned 1. William threw them a little party. Ellie is serious, carefully examining toys. Rosie laughs and claps her hands. They look so much like Mary. I'm afraid I'll never be able to be a good father to them. But I can't give them to strangers either. The last entry was dated January 10th, 1927. The cough is getting worse. The doctor says tuberculosis. I need to go to a sanatorium. William promises to take care of the girls. Lord, give me strength to recover and return to my daughters. Robert never returned. He died in the sanatorium 3 months later. Emma found even more stunning documents. William's correspondence with the adoptive families. He didn't just give away the girls and forget about them. He followed their fate his whole life, secretly helped financially when families had difficulties. In a letter to the Mitchells in 1935, William wrote, "I enclose a check for Eleanor's treatment. Please don't tell her where the money came from. Let her think it's help from a charity organization." In a letter to the Johnsons in 1938, "Is Rose doing well in school? I would be happy to pay for her college when the time comes. This is a debt I can never repay." William felt guilty about separating the sisters until the end of his life. Willing them the house was his attempt to correct the mistake, but the most amazing discoveries awaited us in the house's basement. Emma, exploring old boxes, discovered a metal chest hidden behind the furnace. Inside were children's things from the 1920s. 2 identical little dresses, toys, rattles, a pair of tiny shoes. At the bottom of the chest lay a yellowed photograph. 2 twin girls about 3 years old, sitting on the steps of the same house's porch. On the back, in William's handwriting, "Ellie and Rosie, last day together, August 12th, 1928. This was a photo taken before Eleanor was taken to Chicago. But what was even more stunning was the note found in the same chest, a sheet of paper covered in William's handwriting. "For the girls when they grow up. Ellie is leaving for the Mitchell family in Chicago today. Rosie stays with me until she recovers." Both girls cried at parting. Ellie asked if she would see her little sister again. Rosie didn't understand why Ellie was leaving without her. "I'm leaving this box with their shared toys. Maybe someday they'll find it and understand they were always together in heart. W.D., August 1928. We read this note in the basement by flashlight. Everyone had tears in their eyes. William was trying to preserve the memory of the sisters' last day together. But we found even more letters written much later in adult handwriting. The first, dated 1947. "Rosie, if you ever find this box, know that I remember you. I came to our house, but it's in bad condition. I'll return when I can fix it. Ellie." The second, 1952. "Ellie, I was here too. My husband and I repaired the house and live in it. If you ever come, welcome home. I never forgot you. Rosie." Both sisters found the children's toy box. Both left messages for each other. But Eleanor never returned to the house again. Linda cried reading the letters. She said now it was clear why Rose always kept children's things in the attic and never let anyone throw them away. She hoped her sister would someday return. And I understood why Eleanor always bought gifts for 2 every Christmas. Why 2 identical dresses hung in her closet. Why she sometimes cooked dinner for 1 extra person and set an extra plate on the table. Subconsciously, she waited for her sister her whole life. Now I couldn't just take the money and leave. This family was the only connection to my grandmother and her lost sister. The Carter children, Rose's grandchildren, were my second cousins. We decided to proceed with selling my share, but I stayed in Salem for several more weeks to restore the complete family history together. Michael and Emma helped me find distant Carter relatives. It turned out Robert and Mary had brothers and sisters who moved to other states after the tragedy. The family scattered, lost touch, but some branches could still be traced. My son David came to Salem for the weekend to help with document processing. He saw how the relationship between our families had changed. He said he was proud of me. I had turned a legal dispute into a family reunion. Kate came with her children for the last days of my stay in the city. 4-year-old Sophie immediately befriended Emma. 8-year-old Tom became interested in family archives and helped Michael compile the genealogical tree. On my last evening in Salem, we held a family dinner in the twins' house. Descendants of Eleanor and Rose gathered around the table for the first time in 80 years. We told the children the story of their great-great-grandmothers. We showed found photographs, read letters, explained how an administrative error led to the sisters' separation. Tom asked why the great-great-grandmothers didn't search for each other more actively. We explained that in those times there was no internet, social networks, simple ways to find a person in another state. Plus, both thought they had no living relatives. Linda brought out a family album with photos of Rose from different years. I showed pictures of Eleanor. The children compared them, finding similarities and differences. In childhood photos, the twins really were very similar. But with age, differences became more noticeable. Eleanor grew up more strict, reserved. Rose, more open, cheerful. Different adoptive families, different cities, different life experiences shaped genetically identical people into two different personalities. But in both women's eyes, in all photos, you could read the same sadness, as if something was missing from their lives their whole time, but they couldn't understand what. I returned to Chicago with money from selling my house share, and with understanding of family history I'd never had in my life. I bought an apartment in the same neighborhood where I'd lived before, got a job at a children's hospital. But now I had family in Oregon. We corresponded by email, called on holidays. Michael entered the University of Oregon's history department. He planned to write his thesis on the impact of post-war urbanization on family destinies. Emma became seriously interested in genealogy. She created a website collecting stories of people separated by administrative errors. It turned out our case wasn't unique. There were hundreds of such families across the country. A year later, I came to Salem for Rose's death anniversary. The Carters held a memorial dinner, inviting me as a family member. At the table, we remembered both grandmothers, told children new details of their lives. A museum exhibit opened in the city, Divided Families, Consequences of 20th Century Administrative Errors. Our story became the central exhibit. People came, read documents, looked at photos of the twins, and many recognized echoes of their own family secrets in this story. At the exhibit opening, I met an elderly woman who told a similar story. Her mother was also separated from her sister in childhood due to document confusion. But they found each other only at age 70, living together just 5 years before death. I realized Eleanor and Rose were less lucky. They never met in life. But also more lucky. Their descendants were able to restore the family connection. David transferred to work in Portland and now lives an hour's drive from Salem. He regularly visits the Carters, became friends with James. Together they restore old parts of the house, preserving its historical appearance. Kate comes with her family every summer for a month. The children love exploring the house, finding old things in the attic and basement. Last year, Tom found a collection of old coins from William Davis's time. Sophie discovered a 1920s baby carriage in excellent condition. On the second floor of the house, Linda equipped a family history room. All found documents, photos, twins' letters are stored there. The walls are hung with genealogical charts that Emma compiled. In the center of the room stands a glass display case with children's things from the basement. Little dresses, toys, 3-year-old girls' letters. These are the most valuable exhibits in the family museum. Every year, on March 15th, the twins' birthday, we hold a family celebration. Everyone gathers. The Carters, my children and grandchildren, found distant relatives. 20 people of different generations can sit at the table. We tell family stories, show new finds, plan further research. Children listen with open mouths. For them, the twins' story has become a family legend. This year, Tom, who turned 12, became seriously interested in genealogy. He corresponds with distant Carter relatives in Canada and Australia. The family, scattered across continents by historical upheavals, is gradually restoring connections. Sophie, now 8, draws comics about twin sisters' adventures. In her stories, Ellie and Rosie always find each other and live happily ever after. 3 years have passed since the day I first came to the house in Salem. What began as a fight for real estate turned into restoring family connections severed almost a century ago. I sit in my Chicago apartment, sorting through photos from the last family celebration. In one shot, all the twins' descendants stand on the house porch, the same place where Ellie and Rosie were photographed in 1928 before separation. Now their grandchildren and great-grandchildren stand on the porch. The family is reunited. I look at Eleanor's portrait on my bedside table. It seems like she's smiling, not with that sad smile she had in life, but a real happy one. Her last words proved prophetic. The house remembers the truth. The house really kept the twins' story in archives, documents, children's things in the basement. And when the time came, it told this story. Eleanor said, maybe she's still alive. Rose was already dead when Grandma spoke those words. But the memory of her was alive. The connection between sisters was alive, which neither time nor distance nor administrative confusion could sever. And now this connection is restored through us, descendants of 2 girls who spent their whole lives searching for each other, not even knowing it. The story of 2 wills has ended. The story of the reunited family is just beginning.